So, hello, my name is Karl, as was told, and I am a PhD student in Tallinn University. And I am researching at the history of the Estonian animal welfare movement. And it's an interesting topic because usually when you talk about animal welfare, then usually people tend to think that it starts like in the 1960s or in the 1970s. And even more so in Estonia, when you talk about the Estonian animal welfare or Estonian animal welfare activism, then sometimes it is said that in Estonia, the movement starts in the 2000s, even, or in 2010 or something like that, when the Loomade Nimel was created. But actually, it goes quite far back. And when you look at the history of the animal welfare movement, then you can see that the movement starts actually in the 19th century. The first animal welfare organization in the world was the Royal Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which was founded in 1824 and in London. So actually the movement starts like in the beginning of the 19th century. And also in other parts of Europe also, you can see many animal welfare organizations that were created like in the 1830s, 1840s. There was one in Ulster, that's in Ireland, that was founded in 1836. And then many in Germany, like in Stuttgart, Munich, Dresden, Berlin, Hamburg, and Frankfurt, that were also founded like in the 1930s and 1940s. Edinburgh, 1839, Paris, 1845, and Vienna, 1847. So basically, in the 1830s, in the 1840s, the animal welfare movement, it went to all around Europe, actually. And as for Estonia, then Estonia was, as you know, probably it was part of Russian Empire in the 19th century. And in the Russian Empire, the first animal welfare organization was actually founded quite nearby in Riga, in Latvia, in Riga, in 1861. And probably the ideas of animal welfare, they arrived to Riga from Germany, because Germany was one of the main centers of animal welfare in the 19th century. And in Riga, as you probably know, there were many Baltic Germans. And the first animal welfare organization in the Baltics was founded and led by the Baltic Germans in Latvia, in Riga, in the 1860s. And then in the capital of Russia, the first animal welfare movement was in 1865 in St. Petersburg. And also with St. Petersburg, the movement was created, was founded and led by Germans, actually, by the Russian Germans, by the Baltic Germans also, who lived in St. Petersburg. So in the 1860s, probably the movement arrived to Russian Empire from Germany and England. And now, as for Estonia, then Estonia is exactly between Riga and St. Petersburg. So so it was logical in a way, also because Estonia was also connected with Germans and with the Baltic Germans. It was logical that after Riga and after St. Petersburg, the first animal welfare organization was created in Estonia as well. And in Estonia, the animal welfare movement actually it starts in 1869. That was when the Tallinn Society of Animal Protection was created. Also created by the Baltic Germans, also probably by the upper higher class or by the nobles, by the Baltic German nobles. And then after that, in the 1870s and 1880s, there were animal welfare organizations also in Narva, Tartu, Viljandi, Kuressaare, Valga, and Pärnu. So basically, by the turn of the century, there were 7 animal welfare organizations in Estonia. And out of those organizations, the Tallinn Society was the most prominent. Tallinn Society, it had like probably 200, 300 members by 1880s, and like 500, 600 members by the time of the First World War. The other societies were smaller, but also were founded like the other societies. Many of them faded away in the end of 19th century or in the beginning of the 20th century. And then during the First World War and after the Estonian War of Independence, basically all the animal protection societies besides the Tallinn Society were disappeared. So in 1918, when Estonia gained independence, there was one animal protection group in Estonia, and that was the Tallinn Society. So Tallinn Society was the only one in 1918, and it had approximately like 600 or 700 members. And you can see that from the graph also. I don't know if you can read it out, but basically there were groups founded in the end of the 19th century, and then in 1918 there's only one. But also what you can see from this graph is that in the 1920s and also in the 1930s, there were many new animal welfare organizations created in Estonia. So in 1921, an animal welfare organization was re-established in Tartu, in 1926 in Narva, then in Haapsalu, in Petseri, in Rakvere, Valga, Võru, Sänna, Nõmme, Pärnu, Tapa, Järva-Jaani, and so on. Actually, there are more of them even, but I couldn't fit them all on the graph. But I put them on the map. So you can see from here also how basically whole of Estonia was covered by the animal welfare organization in the interwar period. So you had the animal protection groups in all the major towns, and even like in really small villages of them, there were animal protection groups. And basically the whole of Estonia was covered, well, except Hiiumaa. Hiiumaa didn't have anything. And if you count them all together, then you can find 22 animal welfare organizations, which is quite a lot, actually. It's quite a large number for Estonia. And in 1930s, they talk about how many members the organization have. And they say that there were approximately like 10,000 members in the animal protection groups in Estonia. So at least 10,000 members, probably more. And also they cooperated a lot, they worked together. And one thing that they did, for example, is that in 1929, they created the Estonian Union for the Protection of Animals. They had this symbol also, the green cross. And the Estonian Union for the Protection of Animals, that united all the organization into one big centralized union, centralized organization. So that's what happened in the interwar period. And I don't know, for me at least, it's quite interesting. And one other thing that is really interesting is that when you look at the newspapers in Estonia, then if you look about how often the word loomakaitse or animal protection is used in the Estonian newspapers, then you can find this kind of statistics. Basically, in here, what I have done is that I have put all the newspaper articles in Estonia into a graph, and it shows how often the word animal protection or loomakaitse was used in the Estonian newspapers from 1900 to 2017. And basically from this graph, you can also see how the topic of animal protection, it was really talked about in the interwar period, especially. Like, it's not really talked much about in the beginning of the 1900s, but then when Estonia gains independence, then suddenly the topic of animal protection, it's really something that is talked about. It's talked about a lot. It figures a lot in the newspapers of Estonia. And like in the 1930s, you can even find years when you have like 400 or almost 450 articles about animal protection every year. And also what you can see from this graph is that when Estonia was occupied by Soviet Union in 1940, then that is when the animal protection movement basically stops. And suddenly animal protection is not talked about in the newspaper, not at all. So in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 70s and 80s, there is nothing mentioned in the newspapers about animal protection or about animal welfare. And actually that goes on also after the re-independence of Estonia. So in the 1990s also in the newspapers, the animal protection is not mentioned basically. And the topic starts gaining interest again only in the like 2005 or 2006 or something like that, when the new organization were created again. And also when you look at the graph, then you can see that actually the topic of animal welfare, it is not so popular today as it was in the 1920s and in the 1930s. So animal welfare was more talked about in the 1920s, in the interwar period, than in the 1910s and probably also today. So that is something that I have been looking into. And also one other thing that is interesting is that when you look at the groups of animal welfare in the interwar period, then one thing that they did is that they published journals, magazines about animal protection. That is also something that I have been reading for my research. Like in the interwar period, there were 3 or 4 different journals that were published by the animal welfare groups. One was the Loomakaitsja, Animal Protector. Then there was this Loomakaitse ajakiri, the Journal of Animal Protection, and also Loomasõber, or the Friend of Animals. And they were also, these are really interesting reading materials about the ethics of animal welfare, why you should be kind against animals, what can you do to protect animals. Many topics are discussed there. And also, what did the groups do is that what you can also read from the journals is that they had regular meetings. Yeah, you can also see I put some pictures on the slides about the meetings of the animal welfare. Here you can see a meet. I'm gonna zoom it in. Basically, here is Congress of the Union of Protection of Animals in 1935. There is a theater play by the Nõmme Animal Protection Society, and this is also the Tartus Animal Protection Society. So they had these regular meetings, mostly men, as you can see. Here are the members of the Tallinn Society of Animal Protection, I think in 1935 or something, in a regular meeting. And also one thing that they did is, of course, that they protected animals. They had the inspectors of animal protection in the cities, and they carried out, for example, regular inspections of animals, because there were many horses on the streets. And here, for example, you can see one inspection of horses and carriages in Nõmme in 1936. So the Animal Protection Society of Nõmme had this rule that you have to bring your horses and your carriages to be inspected. Like, are you abusing your horse or not, basically. And also often they intervened. There's a caricature also how somebody tries to stop an animal torturer. And that is also something that they did, that they tried to intervene. They tried to stop animal abuse whenever they saw it. Yes, and also one thing that they did is that they built and put out bird houses, feeding boxes and nesting boxes for the birds. So they protected the horses, but also the birds and the nature in general. That was something that was important for them. And also one thing that they did is that they gave out awards. The symbol of the animal protection movement of Estonia was green cross. So they used this green cross as a symbol of animal protection, and they gave out medals. You can see two of the medals that they gave out. The medals were given to the most active animal protectionists and anybody who tried to help the animal welfare movement. And also they gave out diplomas and all kinds of different awards. And of course, they spread propaganda. You can find many posters about the animal welfare movement. There are some posters from the Tartu Animal Welfare Society. And one thing, for example, that they did is that they celebrated the Global Animal Welfare Day or Global Animal Protection Day every year on the 4th of October. And here you can see some posters about that also that they spread out. Yes, so that is what happened in the interwar period. Really short. Am I in time? I hope you have some kind of idea about what was happening, about how the movement it goes back to the pre-war period. Also, there was an active movement in the 1920s and 1930s as well, and talk much more about it, but I have to keep it short.